guys, it's Bryony. So today I'm going to be talking to you about Lyme disease. I have been getting a number of questions recently from you guys asking me to do a video talking more about my Lyme disease, how I manage it, etc., and I've finally got around to doing it. Now, there are so many different aspects to Lyme disease and so many different things I could talk about that I've decided not to put that all into one video because it would literally be like an hour long. But today I'm going to focus on one question that I've had quite a lot of people ask me on, which is how do I manage my Lyme disease? So if you have any other questions you'd like me to go into more detail about, or any other things you'd like me to talk about that are to do with Lyme disease, please do leave it down below in the comments and I'll add it onto my list. But for today, I'm just going to focus on how I got Lyme disease, a basic overview of it, and also how I manage it. So first of all, what is Lyme disease and how did I get it? Well, Lyme disease is an illness contracted from a tick bite. What happens is you get bitten by a tick, an infected tick that carries it, and it passes the infection into your bloodstream. And the particular bacteria that causes it, there are a couple of different strains, but the one that I have is called Borrelia burgdorferi, I think. I'll spell it out down here. There's a lot of funny names for all this stuff. But that's what I have. That's how I contracted Lyme disease. And I actually had no idea that I'd even been bitten by a tick. Some people who get bitten by ticks and who see the tick, they get what's known as a bullseye rash, which is like a red rash that goes around the area of the tick bite, which is usually like a red flag that shows Lyme disease, you've got Lyme disease. But it only occurs in around 30% of people that get Lyme disease. So even if you don't get this rash, doesn't necessarily mean that you're off the hook. And in my case, I had no idea I'd even been bitten by a tick until I found out I had Lyme disease. Which leads me on to the second part, which is how long have I actually had Lyme disease? This, we honestly don't really know. I have been sick since the age of 10, and I've been very sick since the age of 15. If you've not followed me before, I'm 20, 21 in a month's time. I know I don't look it. Everyone always tells me I'm 16. It's very annoying. But yeah, so I've had it for quite a while. When I was 10, I started getting sick with my energy just getting worse and worse. And when I was 15, I became very, very ill to the point where I actually had to leave school because I was just so exhausted all the time. I was unable to complete any of the work. As well as Lyme disease, though, I also have about 6 or 7 co-infections, which are basically infections that are sort of active at a lower level in my blood and which were picked up in the test that also tested for my Lyme disease. So I could have had one of them before that caused all the other problems and then contracted Lyme at 15. We just don't really know, but Lyme often comes with co-infections as well. So what are the symptoms of Lyme disease? Well, this will vary very much from person to person, and in fact my symptoms were typically quite different from what most people with Lyme disease will get, which is another reason it took so long to get diagnosed with it. But typically the most common symptoms of Lyme disease are headaches, fever, muscle and joint pain, and fatigue. I went ahead and wrote down all the symptoms that I had when I was at my worst, and bear with me because I'm going to have to read off this list. But my worst symptoms were chronic fatigue. That was by far the worst symptom I had. I was so tired all the time, and I still deal with this to a certain extent now. Nausea, joint pain, muscle pain, chest pain, memory loss, hypersensitivity. In my case, it was to smell and light. I was so sensitive to any sort of bright light. I literally had the curtains closed in my bedroom. I was like a vampire. And smell, I have a really strong sensitivity to the smell, in particular of fish. My parents couldn't cook fish at all while I was at home unless they literally like quarantined the house. They had to shut my door, shut the kitchen door, open all the windows out if they wanted to cook fish, because otherwise I would actually throw up just from the smell of it. I was that sensitive to stuff. Sight loss, partial paralysis. In my case, this happened in my legs. A weak immune system, that's very common. And also I have damage to my liver, which I learnt about more recently. So with regards to the partial paralysis, usually this is, it exhibits itself as something called face palsy, which is where you have like partial paralysis of your face. In my case, I didn't have anything with my face apart from like the memory loss, which was neurological, but my legs, I would wake up in the morning not able to feel or move my legs, which was absolutely terrifying. But fortunately I did get it back quite quickly. Usually things like facial palsy and the partial paralysis are not long-term things. They do wear off, but they can in some cases remain permanent. So again, like I said, different varies different from person to person, but that's what happened in my case. So on to the most important part of this video, which is how do I cope with it? Well, I was very lucky because I actually managed to find a doctor who specializes in treating people with Lyme disease purely by accident. I actually went to see her originally because I had got a lot better naturally through basically resting and eating better and all this sort of stuff, but I really wanted to check my blood levels to see like if my vitamin and mineral levels were all okay, and you know, just in general, that kind of stuff, sort of have a health checkup, I guess, which you can't really get on the NHS here without really pushing it. So I went to see a private nutritionist, and she did these blood tests and put me on like a diet and got me to do all these other things and tested me again. And at first my blood test results were like all over the place, and then after she'd put me on some supplements and some tinctures and stuff, they all balanced out, but I was still quite sick, and she was the one who said to me, "You're too ill for these results. There must be something else going on because you don't look well to me." Like in person, I was really pale. I still am quite pale, as you can see. Like my tongue is like white. I was just kind of yellow, very jaundiced, all this kind of stuff. And she was just looking at me like, "You're sick. There's something else wrong with you." So she decided to do a blood test that tested for every single like bacteria and virus that can linger in your blood and can actually remain active. And that's when I finally found out that I had Lyme disease. And actually this test result came back really strong. On this particular test, anything like above a 3 is considered positive, and I was 11. So very strong. And this was last year when I was 19, and if I assume that I contracted Lyme disease at around 15, I'd already been sick for 4 years by this point. Most people with Lyme disease will recover from it after just a few weeks of contracting it through a tick bite, particularly if you catch it in time and you go to the doctor and get antibiotics, which is what you should absolutely do if you do notice that you've been bitten by a tick, and in particular if you see that rash, if you live in an area where there are Lyme carrying ticks, very important you do that. But in my case, it has become chronic because it's passed from my bloodstream into my tissues. It might sound really weird, but in some ways it was a relief when I found out that I had Lyme disease, because up until that point I'd been told I had ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which has no known cure, has no kind of real known treatment. There are different options that they give you, but they don't really know what to do with it. Whereas Lyme disease, it's an actual physical thing that can be seen in your blood, and there's a little more room to play when it comes to medication for it. So one of the first things that my doctor did was she put me on a course of antibiotics, which unfortunately I reacted really badly to. I was put onto doxycycline and clarithromycin. The doxycycline was horrendous. It made me feel nauseous. I started vomiting, having stomach pain, and like having a really weird taste in my mouth, and she told me you need to stop that immediately. And after I had that reaction, she ordered a liver test for me like ASAP because she needed to see what was going on, and that came back abnormal as well, so then she had to stop the clarithromycin. So even though I was supposed to be taking these supplements for 2 months, I ended up only taking the clarithromycin for 2 weeks and the doxycycline for 3 days. But she did also put me on a 6-week course of some kind of, they're not herbal tinctures, they were actual proper like remedies and things, but that was designed to boost my immune system so that when I took the antibiotics I would be in a better place. And she spoke to another Lyme specialist who said that he felt he could manage it doing a different system through diet and all that kind of stuff. So that was really all I did in terms of treatment for Lyme disease, like taking medication for it. Mostly I just manage it on a day-to-day basis through diet, exercise, and all that jazz. But when it actually comes to managing it, I think there are 5 things that are really important. Number 1 is knowing what I can and can't do. I can live a pretty normal life now. I can like run my business, I can go out and see friends, I can hang out with family members and stuff, which is all really great, but there are still some limitations. For example, one thing that I absolutely cannot do, and I have learned I just can't do, is get up very early in the morning, say like 6 or 7 a.m. 8 a.m. is my absolute earliest. If I wake up any earlier than that, I am horrendously nauseous. I can only imagine it's what having morning sickness feels like. It is awful. And the problem is that when you say this to people, they just think you're lazy, and they think like, well, you know, that's just a poor excuse, go to bed earlier. And I'm like, no, it's not that. It's because, as I mentioned before, in my case, the Lyme has damaged my liver. Lyme disease, by the way, can affect any part of your body, heart, neurological, just everything really. But in my case, it's damaged my liver. and your liver starts working at around 3 a.m. in the morning. So because mine's damaged, it's essentially like an old car. It's a bit slower to do stuff. So it's still working a few hours later after most people's would have sort of done their job. And this is the only reason I can suspect, and that the doctors have been able to work out, for why I feel so nauseous early in the morning, is because my body's still trying to process all these toxins and stuff through my liver, but it's taking its time. So when you mention this to people, they just think, oh, you can't get up early in the morning. And I'm like, well, I can be there, but I will be throwing up on you. So trust me, you do not want me there. So I've had to learn to get around it by just saying to people, if I need to speak at an event and it's going to be an early start, well, I need to speak later on in the day and I'll just come later on for that part. If it's an event that's further away, then I have to go and stay the night there. But there's a way to get around it. So as long as I'm really careful about that, and like flights, for example, I just can't take any early morning flights. So yeah, I might have to spend a little bit more. But for me, it's totally worth it to just not feel like crap, because it really is I think nausea is one of the worst things you can have. It is horrendous. Top tip, by the way, if you are prone to nausea and like travel sickness and that kind of stuff, try something called Truvella. It's one of my lifesavers. I always have Truvella and either mints or chewing gum on me, because those are the things that just save my life when I'm feeling nauseous. The second thing that I do to manage Lyme disease is I take a few supplements on a daily basis. So for me, one of the things I take is magnesium, and that's magnesium with B6 as well. I also take omega-3, and I take vitamin D in the winter when we don't have this lovely, gorgeous weather that I currently have right now. To be honest, even if you haven't got Lyme disease but you live in England, you should always take vitamin D in the winter anyway, because none of us ever get enough of it. But those are 3 supplements of a couple of others that I take specifically to manage my Lyme disease, because one of the tests came back as saying like there is a 100% chance that I'm deficient in magnesium, so I make sure that I always take that one. And the omega-3 I'm not quite so strict on, but I do try and take that quite frequently as well, because my fatty acid tests came back as being a bit low. So as long as I take those, I find that can generally help maintain a general good level of health for me. The third thing I do to manage my periods is eat the right food. Eating and drinking the right things is so crucial, because as I said before, it's affected my liver. There are certain things that I can't have. So I can't drink alcohol, caffeine, too much sugar, dairy, I've got to limit, but I tend to eat mostly plant-based, which is essentially vegan. And I also probably shouldn't have as much gluten as I do have. That's one thing that can also make it worse. However, this is the one thing that I have compromised on, because I find that I can be healthy enough with still eating like good bread, and I love pastries and bread and all this sort of thing. So that's really difficult for me personally to give up gluten. My mum is gluten-free, but I just find it so difficult. But I find that if I don't worry too much about the gluten, but worry about the other things, that's fine for me. It manages my health. It might sound a bit extreme to some people, but trust me, when you felt like how you actually react to that stuff, you just know it's not worth it. So the fourth thing I do to manage my Lyme disease is I have what I call a treat plan in place. Every now and then I'll get a day that I call my Lyme low, where I just feel so drained of energy, so low, it's almost like depression, it's horrible. And I just know that I'm gonna have to spend that whole day feeling really blah. But I've learned that I do then usually feel fine the next day. So what I do is when I have one of those bad days, because I wake up and I know instantly I'm having one, I get into comfy pajamas, I find a movie I want to watch, I have some like food that's maybe cheap food that I don't have too often, and I just sit and I just wallow in self-pity and all this sort of stuff, and I just eat this nice food, watch my movie, and I don't worry too much about work. Fortunately, my work is quite flexible, so I can like adjust things. I just get the essentials done. If it's like 15 minutes, I'm like, I'll blitz through this, get it done, and then go back to doing what I want, and the next day I feel fine. So that really helps me, I've learned, because if I just let myself accept that I'm going to have one of those bad days and then get on with it, I'm going to usually be good. And the fifth and most important thing about how I manage my Lyme disease is that I just accept that I am sick. When you first get ill with Lyme disease, or with any illness to be honest, one of the hardest things is accepting that you have actually got it. And it's just things like when other people can eat bad foods or like do things that you can't, and you're like, why can they do that and I can't? The truth is, it's just because life isn't fair. Like, they just can. Some people can do things and eat like horrendous food and be fine with it. Some people, like me for example, get really sick eating certain things, or get really sick just from doing very small activities. It's just the way it is. And the truth is, you probably can't change that. But I find it a lot easier to get on with stuff if I just accept that that's the case and be like, do you know what? that's just not what it was meant to be like for me. I am also religious, so it makes it a little bit easier for me because I just say, well, you know what, that's God's plan, and so I find some comfort in that. But even if you're not religious, just thinking, well, it's fate, it's just what's meant to happen, that can sometimes be very helpful too. So remaining positive is incredibly important, and always looking on the bright side. And whenever anyone says this to you in person and they're like, you just need to think positive, you want to slap them. Believe me, I've been there, I know what it's like, but it really is the truth, just staying positive about things in any way that you can. For example, I might have Lyme disease, but I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't gone through that. And I think I'm better in terms of having more empathy for other people, but also it gave me the opportunity to start my business. It's how I found my products that I sell, you know, the cloth pads and the menstrual cups. It's how I found where I really belonged, and I just feel so grateful that I got a chance to do this. So just because something bad's happened to you doesn't mean that everything that's going to happen as a result of that is going to be bad. Some of it might actually be quite good, and you might be quite surprised by things that you learn along the way. I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and I hope it was helpful to any of you out there going through Lyme disease or any other chronic illness, to be honest. Some of this applies just in general to many other chronic illnesses. Let me know in the comments if you have suffered with anything like this, or if you have Lyme disease, and any other videos that you'd like to see me do, any other parts of Lyme disease you'd like to see me talk about in more detail, and I'll be happy to oblige. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe. Don't forget you can get cloth pads and menstrual cups from my website, Precious Stars. The link is down below, and I will see you next week. Bye, guys.